Well, good morning, and thanks, Christina. And we are here to talk about some changes, and I'll get to that in just a moment here. Uh, a lot to cover though. Looking here at the last week, many very important changes have taken place. Some issues with dryness still continue in areas, but what a week that we've had. I want to start by saying, and this is a map we don't see very often, or variable. These are dew point temperatures here an hour ago. Basically, a dew point temperature is a measure of how much water vapor is in the air to how humid is it. And the reason I put this up here is because essentially the weather situation that we've been in virtually for at least a week with unusually high, and that doesn't do it justice, bold and underline under that, unusually high humidity, atmospheric humidity here for the last week, which is why we've had so much rain in many areas. That synoptic situation and all of the moisture with it is moving. And it is right now in the process of being pushed off to the south and east of Michigan. You can see a little bit of that, but what we've got coming, we've got some Canadian air moving into the state now as we speak. It's going to be here for the next couple of days. But I think the bigger news is that situation that we have been stuck in suspended animation here literally for a week is finally changing. And it's all related to, most of these things are, to the upper air. I'll show you that in just a second. Maybe most importantly here, if we look at the rainfall totals over the last week on the right-hand side here, you can see that clearly southern lower Michigan, the southern half essentially of the state, saw heavy, much above normal rainfall. As little as maybe 2 inches in some spots, but to as much as 7 or 8 inches. You can see a lot of the red colors here indicating over 6 inches. These are incredible totals for 1 week. And something to keep in mind, our normal monthly, June is in some cases, it's the wettest month climatologically in the state. It depends on where you are. But our normal rainfall for the month of June is a little bit less than 3 inches in the far northeastern part of the state, to a little bit less than 4 inches out in the extreme south. So one way of looking at this is that in some spots we've had at least a month, in some cases 2 full normal months of precipitation in 1 week. That's hard to do. That's something we don't see very often happen here climatologically. And of course, there are positives and there are negatives with that. All the rain at one time, of course, is an issue as well, but it has really completely changed or drastically changed where we were just a couple of weeks ago. It's important to note here, though, also in this map, that as we go north, especially into northern lower Michigan, there was precipitation in the northern part of the state, but it was significantly less than what fell in the south. Again, all of this back to that same pattern I talked about with a southwesterly flow aloft and the Gulf of Mexico wide open, and all of this humidity here with rain almost on a daily basis. It was less as the farther north that you went. For temperatures here, for looking at the last week, depends on, again, where you were, a couple to a degree or two below normal in portions of upper Michigan, to 2, 3, maybe even 4 degrees above normal. A lot of that was due to very mild overnight temperatures. And there's another impact to that. We did have in the middle of this on Saturday, last Saturday, we had a severe weather outbreak, a little bit somewhat unexpected, but it was, and this is mostly localized, but we did see some thunderstorms, severe thunderstorms, 6 confirmed tornado touchdowns across Michigan. You can see those there in Michigan as the red symbols. Blue symbols are high wind, or damage from high wind. There's there were a couple of those in there, but in general, it was localized, and the tornadoes were relatively small and weak. Of course, that doesn't help if it hits your property, hits your particular farm, and we did see some localized damage in some cases, but the vast majority of areas did not see other than the heavy rain. That was the major impact from this weather system. In terms of soil moisture, looking at some of the impacts here, there were some of the negative impacts that we can think about. Of course, wheat is at or is mature and drying down and just pre-harvest with all that weight and all that water on there. We did see some wheat go down. That's a bad thing. I think a bigger issue is probably regarding fertilizer and movement, given, again, several of these places, 2, 3 inches of rain fell in a short period of time. That is certainly a concern, something you want to keep in mind here, because many people, of course, had, either applied at plant or had already had side dress applications there. That's one of the larger potential negatives of so much rain. But on the positive side, we went from literally flip-flopped many portions of the state from severe drought to to flooding, literally within a 1 to 2 week time frame. And again, that's something we don't see very often. Soil moisture, this is expressed in terms, it's related to the variable that the Dean just showed here with plant extractable moisture in the top 3 feet of the soil profile. And on the left-hand side, this is the actual current value here, or a day old, but many, many fewer dark browns and oranges here than there have been over the last several weeks. A lot of the moisture, depending on the soil type, did soak in. More importantly, here on the right-hand side, you can see this is the relative change in soil moisture, the same variable in the top 3 feet versus 2 weeks ago. And look at all the greens and blues across the southern portion of lower Michigan. We added water back into the profile. And so that's a very, very positive thing, because we are now moving into the, two things: the greatest crop water demand of the season during July and August. We're also entering into climatologically the time of greatest atmospheric demand. When is the evaporation rates, or when are they highest? It's July and August. So both of those things, it really helps to have some water in reserve in the soil, and that's what that's suggesting. Now, note in the northern part of the state, it was less. We actually lost a little bit more ground, and that has some relevance here as we look ahead in our forecast. In terms of climatology and long term, and I wanted to throw this one up here. We've had Kalamazoo on here before. That was one of the areas where dryness was most critical. This is a daily precipitation accumulation graphic that goes back to the beginning of the calendar year. The green is the actual observed total. The brown is the normal. And what you can see here is just, again, a complete reversal. Drier than normal conditions with the exception of late March and April, but definitely during much of the spring, well below normal. And here is the last 2 weeks. And note, at Kalamazoo, they've actually had 2 major rounds. The last 2 weeks have been very, very wet. But this is a jump here of almost 10 inches, which is, again, extraordinary in climatological terms. Very, very unusual to see that. And you can see that we've gone from being way, way below, actually almost record-breaking low levels, to actually a little bit above normal at this particular station. Now, it depends and varies on where you are. As we look across the state, and this is looking at rainfall departures that go back to last fall, because some areas of the state actually were drier than normal even late last year. But as we look at Michigan, the yellows and oranges here are still existing deficits relative to from fall to present. The greens and the blues are surpluses, but we've seen major changes. But it's important to note that there are areas of the state, especially across the eastern lower peninsula, some portions of west central lower Michigan, and then up into the eastern UP, where long-term deficits still do remain at this point in time. So it wasn't a one event cure-all type of thing or change-all. We certainly saw that across much of southern lower Michigan, but there still are areas that do have long-term deficits there. And I think that's another hint or sign that this issue may not go away, depending on what we see here. We haven't seen the last of this, but something at least to keep in mind. Obviously, things are much better for the near-term future, but it could become an issue once again as we move into July and August. Degree day totals here ranging from a little bit behind normal accumulation as of the end of June here in the northern part of the state to 50 to as much as 150 units ahead as you go down into the southern part of the state. So it depends north-south on where you are in the state. One last thing, and I threw this in here. We had Jamie Wilbur last week talking about Cercospora and sugar beets. We had, with all of the rainfall, we had an extended wetting event, certainly across the southern part of the state. This is 5-minute data, 1 week of 5-minute data taken from our EnviroWeather site at Sparta. It's fairly representative. All of the rainfall events on the bottom one here are these green bars when we actually saw rain in a 5-minute period. The graphic here on the top, the red is air temperature, the blue is dew point temperature, and of course when they're real close together, we're close to 100% relative humidity. Just below that, that is a relative humidity chart with in the green here, but you can see from late Thursday with a significant rainfall event, we had virtually a continuous wetting event all the way into Sunday morning. 60 hours plus. And that's something we don't see very often in Michigan. Again, it is a humid climate, but we almost always see a diurnal cycle in there. But because of the timing, how frequent the rain was during that time frame, we saw virtually, again, this is looking at water, liquid water on the plant surface. So something to think about in terms of disease management. This is a long, long event, and we saw that again across many southern sections of the state. Well, as we look ahead here, I mentioned the changes are underway. Upper air pattern here currently on the left-hand side, and the upper air chart that you see here almost can't, we look at this as a meteorologist and you just shake your head, that this big ridge out over Western Canada, this is something that we never, ever see at this time of the year. Usually the jet stream has contracted northward or poleward, or it's on its way northward, and we just don't see the amplitude of a ridge or a trough like this, like we have right now over the Great Lakes region. But this ridge is, and you probably realize this or knew this, but this is the direct cause of all of the record. And record doesn't do it justice either. They've broken all of their all-time records in the Pacific Northwest and as well as Western Canada as well. Many fatalities with the heat out there, but they have set all-time new records. And that is the feature really that's responsible for that. And so the question is, what's going to happen to it? Does it move over us? And the answer is, well, yes, but it's going to be much, much less in magnitude. We will see sort of a glancing visit to our south. Here's the forecast upper air pattern here for the beginning of next week. And you can see some big changes here. Basically, the flow flattens out. It becomes less meridional. That's an important thing. It actually opens up to more changes. But for the near-term future here, we actually have a troughing feature over us. And that's going to give us a couple days of cool, noticeably cooler weather and dry. But the other operative phrase is here, we are looking at a several-day period of extended dry weather. And I know before we started here, Phil reminded me that, well, people were happy to have some water back in their cropping systems. Of course, if you had to harvest forage or you were worrying about that, it was one of the worst weeks that we could have chosen. We're going to see a flip-flop on that. We're going to see excellent conditions here for forage harvest over the next several days, with initially cool and then and warmer with time, but dry, low humidities as well. So it should be near ideal conditions for harvesting forage. But that's sort of the direction we're going at. It's going to be a drier than normal week here, and initially it'll start out cool. Start with the forecast maps here this morning. I mentioned that all that humidity is off to the south and east. We have a cool front with an air mass up here over northern Ontario. That's that Canadian air mass that I mentioned. It's moving southward into the Great Lakes, and it's going to be here for the next 2 days. So gorgeous conditions, noticeably cooler than it's been, and noticeably drier and less humid as the day goes on. Now, because we have cold air aloft with that trough, there will be some scattered or maybe even isolated showers and a thunderstorm develop here during the day today, especially during the afternoon. But that will be much more the exception rather than the rule. I think if we do see activity, it's going to be across the eastern portion of lower Michigan. The western part of the state probably will remain dry. That's the last chance for precip we have for several days. By tomorrow morning, you can see the center of the high moves directly into the Great Lakes region. So looking at sunny skies, clear, cool or fair and cool conditions, and that continues on into Saturday. Here's Saturday morning at 8 a.m. So we're looking at, again, an extended several-day period of dry conditions. Now, after this high, which is over central Missouri here by Saturday morning, that will shift to the east. By Sunday, we will see a noticeable warm-up. And that, I mentioned that big ridge out over the west that's been causing so many problems. That's when we start to see at least the influence of that, and we'll see our temperatures jump back up to above normal levels on Sunday and continue there for the early part of next week. So we probably will see our high temperatures pushing 90 again. That's as close as we're going to get to that record heat they had. But it's a piece of that air mass, or some of what's left of that air mass that'll be with us for a few days. In terms of precipitation, after today, the next chance for anything, I think, of note or significance, probably not until at least late Monday or Tuesday, better chance, or Wednesday of next week. And right now, it's not looking like a major precipitation producer, but that will be the next chance we have of anything significant. And so for our precip totals forecast for the upcoming week, drier than normal. You can see less than a quarter of an inch for a good chunk of the state. This band here of a quarter of an inch across the south, that's all expected. That's that middle of next week. So virtually nothing expected here in the short-term future, or really over the next several days, not until next week. So definitely a drier than normal pattern setting up. Our potential evapotranspiration rates, because we will see temperatures increase from, well, especially today, tomorrow, we'll be in the 70s for highs and down in the 50s, even some upper 40s for lows across northern sections of the state. That's for the next 2 days. But again, by Sunday, we will see a big change. We'll be jumped back up to the 80s to near 90, maybe even some low 90s. We'll stay there for the early part of next week. Because of that, our PET rates are projected to increase back to above normal levels. As you can see here, probably up around 0.2 of an inch per day is what we'll be looking at, especially as we get towards the early part of next week, maybe even a little bit better or higher than that. In the medium range forecast guidance, the jet stream forecast is a lot like that panel that I showed here just a couple ago on the right-hand side here. It's more zonal, more west to east than it was. There's sort of a broad ridge out over the western part of the U.S. That's actually bad news for them, for the areas with drought and heat, because it's generally going to continue that pattern there. But the major, there's a couple themes in the forecast in the medium range. It's been consistent, 6 to 10 and 8 to 14 day outlooks, very similar, but they both call fairly strongly for a warmer than normal mean temperatures, which I think is a good bet. And they also call for Michigan to be, in essence, in between areas of drier than normal conditions to our west. That's again out of the northern plains to the northwest, and wetter than normal conditions to our south. You can see they actually right in here put us in a little bit above normal. I think we could be either of these. There's less confidence about this. I would say though that with time, the last couple outlooks have had more of the outlooks saying above normal precip or wetter than normal for us versus before, but we could go either way because the pattern that you see here is expected to continue for a good chunk of July. This is the updated July outlook, which was issued last Friday, and it's very similar to the medium range you just saw. Note, warmer than normal for virtually all of the northern U.S., including Michigan, and then precip will, again, those two areas, drier than normal to our west, wetter than normal to our south, so no real clear defined direction. But the message here, again, I think is we're going back up to warmer than normal, and maybe we'll stay or persist there for a while during the month of July. So summarizing, big changes coming. We've seen big changes over the past week, but more on the way. Fair, cooler here, noticeably cooler. The holiday weekend looks ideal any way you cut it, especially again if you've got them cut hay or work with forage. It's just almost ideal conditions. But we will see a noticeable warming trend start again by the end of the weekend on the 4th on Sunday, and then continue on into next week. And then ultimately, as you just saw, in the longer term, the next several weeks are also looking warmer than normal. So with that, I will wrap up and move to introduce next week's speaker. This is a week from today, the 8th of July. We'll have a visit with our MSU Extension stress specialist, Eric Karbowski, and he'll be with us again a week from today. So don't miss that. And with that, I will turn it back over to Christina and or Phil. Thanks.